My mother-in-law sat across from me in a beige office chair in my office on a Tuesday afternoon in March and asked me to save her husband's company. 3 years earlier, at her dining table on Corbin Lane, in front of 11 people and a turkey she'd basted with her mother's recipe, she told the whole table I wasn't smart enough to manage money. Her exact words were, "Some people just aren't built for numbers." Then she smiled at me over her wine glass. I want to tell you what happened in between those 2 afternoons. Not because I need you to feel sorry for me. I don't. I want to tell you because of one detail Patricia Whitfield never figured out. Not once. Not even when she was sitting in my office asking for help. I never stopped keeping records. Not for revenge. Just because that's who I am. It turns out that's the same thing in the end. I already knew why she was there before she said a word. I'd known for about 6 weeks, ever since a woman named Sherry Popovich cornered me in the cereal aisle at the Kroger on Route 9 and asked, very carefully, whether I'd heard anything about Frank's situation. I hadn't heard anything official, but I'd seen a lien filing come across my desk with a Whitfield Construction letterhead on it, because my firm does public records searches for half the small businesses in this county, and I recognized the address before I recognized the name. So when Pat called my office and asked, in a voice I hadn't heard her use with me since our wedding toast, whether she could stop by and talk business, I already had the folder pulled. I just didn't tell her that. She wore a blazer I didn't recognize, the kind you buy for an occasion you're dreading. She'd had her hair done. She sat with her purse in her lap like she was at a job interview, which in a way she was. My office isn't fancy. It's 400 square feet above a nail salon with a window unit that rattles in August and a coffee maker that's older than my marriage. But it's mine, every square foot of it, in a way that no room on Corbin Lane had ever been. And I noticed Pat noticing that. The framed articles on the wall, the client thank you cards pinned to a corkboard by the door, my name on the glass out front in gold vinyl letters that a sign shop on Route 9 had installed 2 summers earlier. "Claire," she said, "you look well." I let that sit for a second. 3 Thanksgivings had passed since she'd last used my name instead of her. "Pat," I said, "what can I do for you?" She told me Frank's company owed the IRS a little over $340,000 in unpaid payroll taxes going back 2 years, and that Heritage Trust Bank had already sent a default notice on the equipment loan. She said their accountant, not me, obviously never me, had made some errors. She said the bank wanted a restructuring plan by the end of the month, or they'd call the whole loan due, and that would mean the house on Corbin Lane, the one with the wraparound porch, the one I was never allowed inside without an invitation, would go with it because Frank had put it up as collateral in 2019 without telling anyone at that Thanksgiving table. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask how I'd been in any way that expected an answer. She said, "You do this kind of thing for other people." I thought maybe for family. I want you to notice that word. Family. She hadn't used it about me in 3 years, and here it was, doing exactly the work she needed it to do. To understand why that word landed the way it did, you need to go back to 2018, to a town called Brackenridge, about 40 minutes outside Columbus, where I met Sean Whitfield at a continuing education class neither of us particularly wanted to be in. He was training to be an electrician. I was already a CPA, 2 years out of my license, working 60-hour weeks at a firm downtown that mostly did tax prep for restaurants and dry cleaners. He made me laugh in a way that felt inconvenient at the time, and I married him anyway, in October of 2019, at a courthouse, because neither of us wanted a big production. His mother wanted a big production. She got one anyway. 6 months later, a proper reception, she planned almost entirely without asking me what I wanted, at a banquet hall with a chandelier she mentioned in every conversation for a year afterward. I want to be fair here, because fairness matters to me, maybe more than it should. Pat wasn't cruel in the beginning. She was particular. She corrected the way I loaded her dishwasher. She asked, more than once, in front of Sean, whether I was sure I wanted to keep my maiden name professionally, Doyle, on my business cards, because it looked like I didn't believe the marriage would last. She had a way of saying things that sounded like concern and landed like a verdict. Frank was quieter. He ran Whitfield Construction, a company his own father started in 1974, framing houses and pouring foundations across 3 counties. He liked me, I think, in the uncomplicated way some men like anyone who doesn't ask them to talk about feelings. "Denise," Sean's older sister, was the one who'd already given Pat and Frank 2 grandchildren and a son-in-law who worked at the same bank that would later hold Frank's loan. Denise got the good chair at holidays, the one with the armrests, closest to Pat. Denise got mentioned first in the Christmas letter, in the paragraph with the exclamation points. I noticed this before Sean did, because I notice patterns for a living. It's a professional habit that doesn't turn off just because you've left the office. I want to be clear that I didn't walk into that family looking for problems. I liked Frank's cookouts. I liked the way Sean's dad kept a coffee can of loose change on the workbench in the garage and let Maya's older cousins dig through it for quarters. For a while I told myself the coolness I felt from Pat was just a mother adjusting to sharing her son, and that it would soften with time, the way people say these things soften. It didn't soften. It just got quieter, and quiet is harder to point to than loud. You can't hold up a recording of somebody's tone and say, "See right there." You can only add it to a list in your head and wait to see if the list keeps growing. It kept growing. Thanksgiving 2022 was the 4th one I'd spent at that house. By then I had a pattern of my own. I'd bring a dish, I'd help clear, I'd sit slightly outside the family photo, and I'd tell myself it didn't matter. That year, Frank's company had just lost a bid on a school renovation contract to a firm 2 towns over. He was in a mood about it before we even sat down. Somewhere between the mashed potatoes and the pie, Denise's husband, Todd, made an offhand comment about interest rates, and Pat said, mostly to fill space, "Well, Claire would know about that. She does taxes." I said something small. I don't even remember what. Probably that I did advisory work, not just taxes, because by then I'd started taking on small business clients on the side. Pat laughed. Not a mean laugh, exactly. A performing one, aimed at the table. "Advisory," she repeated. "Honey, some people just aren't built for numbers. No offense. You're sweet, but Denise's Todd actually works at a bank." The table laughed, the way tables do when they relieve someone else as the target. Sean started to say something, and I put my hand on his knee under the table because I'd learned by then that defending me only made the next dinner worse. What nobody at that table knew, because I'd never told them, on purpose, was that 6 weeks earlier, I'd sat with Frank in his own truck outside of Sherwin-Williams and, unprompted, walked him through why his payroll company's reporting looked off to me. I'd offered for free to look at his books. He'd said, "I appreciate it, Claire, but Pat's got a system with Marv, their accountant of 11 years, a man who filed his own returns using software from 2011. So when Pat said I wasn't built for numbers, I knew 2 things. I knew she was wrong, and I knew Frank already suspected she was wrong too, and had chosen his wife's comfort over my offer anyway. That wasn't the only incident. It was just the latest one. There was Christmas 2020, when the family card went out with a photo of everyone but Sean and me because we'd been hard to schedule for the sitting, even though nobody had asked us the date. There was the cabin trip in the summer of 2021. Family only this time. Pat told Sean on the phone while I stood close enough to hear it. There was the rumor, which reached me secondhand through Sean's cousin at a wedding, that I'd pressured Sean into marriage because my student loans were bad. A detail that was not only false but backwards, since I'd paid off the last of Sean's truck loan the year before with my own bonus, quietly, the way I do most things. And there was Frank's 60th birthday, in April of 2022, at the same banquet hall as the wedding reception, because Pat liked the chandelier that much. Denise gave a toast about growing up watching her dad work, about the smell of sawdust on his jacket when he came home. It was a good toast. I'm not being sarcastic. I cried a little, actually, and I don't cry easily at other people's stories. Sean wanted to give a toast too. He'd written something on a legal pad the night before, sitting on our bed, reading lines out loud to me and crossing them out. When the time came, Pat handed the microphone to Todd instead. Since Todd's known Frank almost as long, being family and all, and the moment passed the way moments do at events like that. Quickly, publicly, with nowhere for anyone to put their disappointment except in their pocket for later. Sean didn't say anything. He just folded the legal pad in half and put it in his jacket. I still have it, actually. It's in a drawer in my office, under the lean filing. I don't know why I keep either one. I just do. And there was my father. If you've ever sat at a table where you weren't quite wanted, you already know the sound that silence makes. It's not dramatic. Nobody raises their voice. It's just a slight delay before anyone answers you, A half second where you can feel yourself being weighed. I got good at hearing that half second. I got good at a lot of things I never wanted to be good at. My dad, Robert Doyle, died in February 2023. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to the funeral, which is its own kind of cruelty, the speed of it. Sean's family came to the service. Pat wore a black dress and stood near the back, and afterward, in the reception hall at St. Aloysius, she told my Aunt Carol, not me, my aunt, in a voice clearly meant to travel, that it was probably for the best he went quickly, given the medical bills. My father had good insurance. He'd paid off our childhood house. There were no medical bills to speak of. She didn't know that. She said it anyway, because it was the kind of thing that sounded wise if you didn't check it. I didn't confront her that day. I remember standing by the coffee urn, folding a paper napkin into smaller and smaller squares until it wouldn't fold anymore, and deciding, very calmly, that I was done auditioning for a family that had already made up its mind about me. My mother, Carol, found me there a few minutes later and just stood next to me without saying anything, which is, I've come to think, one of the more underrated forms of love, knowing when a person doesn't need you to fix the moment, just to stand in it with them. Sean heard about the comment from my aunt a week later, at our kitchen table, over reheated lasagna from the funeral casserole rotation. He went quiet for a long time, and then he said, I should have seen this sooner. I told him he didn't owe me a confession, and he said, I know. I'm giving you one anyway. That's the kind of husband he turned out to be, in case you're wondering why I stayed married into that family at all. I wasn't staying for Pat. Sean and I stopped going to Corbin Lane after that. Not with a scene. Just a slow, mutual absence. We skipped the following Easter with a vague excuse about Sean's work schedule, and nobody pushed back hard enough to make us explain further. Pat noticed. She didn't call to ask why. Here's the part of the story where, if this were a movie, I'd tell you I got even. I didn't. I got busy. I'd already been taking on side clients. A food truck owner named Reggie, who needed his first real bookkeeping system, a husband and wife HVAC company drowning in unfiled quarterlies. In April of 2023, 2 months after my father's funeral, I gave notice at the downtown firm and rented 400 square feet above a nail salon on Ferris Street. I put a folding table in it and a second-hand filing cabinet I bought off a woman in Grove City for $60, and I hung a sign that just said Claire Doyle, CPA, because by then I didn't care anymore whether that name looked commitment-shaped to anyone. Sean framed out a real desk for me on weekends, out of leftover lumber from a job site. My daughter, Maya, was born that October, 3 weeks early on a Tuesday, in a hospital room where the only grandmother present was my mother, holding Maya's hand through the isolate glass and crying in the quiet way people cry when they're trying not to make it about themselves. Pat sent a card, blue, generic, from the drugstore rack. Inside it said, "Congratulations on your bundle of joy," in printed script, and under that, in her handwriting, "Let us know if you need anything, Grandma Pat." She hadn't asked to visit. She hadn't asked Maya's name until 4 months later, at a gas station, by accident, from Sean's cousin. I kept the card. I keep most things. It's not sentimentality, exactly. It's the same instinct that makes me photograph a receipt before I file it. You never know which small piece of paper is going to matter later. Those first 2 years of the business were mostly spreadsheets at the kitchen table after Maya went to sleep, and a lot of coffee that went cold before I finished it. Sean took on extra electrical jobs on weekends, so I could put my own paycheck back into the business instead of drawing a full salary. We didn't take a vacation in 2023 or 2024. We ate a lot of the same 6 dinners on rotation. Nobody was watching any of that. That's the part these stories usually skip. The years where nothing dramatic is happening, where you're just quietly, boringly, showing up for your own life every single day, with no guarantee it's going to add up to anything. I'm not going to tell you my business exploded overnight, because that's not what happened to me, and I don't think it's what happens to most people. What happened was slower and, honestly, more boring than anyone wants to hear in a story like this. Reggie's food truck did well enough to add a second truck, and he told 2 other vendors at the same festival circuit about me. The HVAC couple referred their supplier. By the winter of 2024, I had 11 clients and had to hire someone, a semi-retired bookkeeper named Fran who'd worked 40 years at a paper mills accounting office and could smell a misfiled 1099 from across the room. There was a stretch that January where I almost lost my biggest client, a landscaping company with 4 crews and a fleet of trucks, because their previous bookkeeper had let their workers' comp classification lapse without telling anyone. I spent 3 straight nights untangling it, missed Maya's bedtime twice, and fixed it 2 days before a scheduled state audit that would have shut them down for a season. The owner, a man named Pete Andrea's son, cried a little in my office when I told him it was resolved, and then he told 6 other contractors about me at a regional builders meeting that spring. That's how it actually spreads, in a town this size. Not through press releases. Through men like Pete telling other men like Pete, over bad coffee in a hotel conference room, that there's a woman on Ferris Street who catches things before they become disasters. The turn, if there was one, came in March of 2025, when a reporter from the Central Ohio Business Journal, a small trade paper, not glamorous, but read by exactly the people who mattered in this county, called me about a piece on small firms helping local businesses survive the post-pandemic lending squeeze. I gave her 40 minutes and 3 client references. The piece ran with my photo standing in front of my building on Ferris Street, the one that by then had a real sign, gold lettering, Doyle Advisory Group, 4 employees, 31 clients. I didn't send it to Pat. I didn't need to. Brackenridge is a town of 11,000 people, and Sherry Popovich reads the Business Journal at the hair salon on Tuesdays. Word doesn't travel through people who love you first. It travels through people who are watching you, which isn't the same thing. Sherry mentioned the article to her sister, who attends the same church as Pat. Pat mentioned it to Denise, apparently with some confusion, because the last update she'd had on my career was she does taxes. Denise, to her credit, and I want to be fair, because Denise never treated me as badly as her mother did, she was mostly just quiet when it mattered. Denise looked me up on LinkedIn and found 31 client testimonials and a hiring post for a 5th employee. I know all of this because Sean's cousin, the same one who eventually told me our daughter's name had reached Pat by accident, is a talker, and by May I'd heard, secondhand, that Pat had told a woman at church that her daughter-in-law runs a whole company now, if you can believe it. I could believe it. I built it with a folding table and a filing cabinet from Grove City. I just noticed that the tone had changed from something to apologize for into something to mention. That's a small shift, but if you've ever lived it, you know it isn't small at all. It's the difference between being a disappointment and being an asset, and in some families, those are the only 2 categories available to you. Sean's cousin also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Pat had asked Denise whether she thought I'd be willing to talk business given everything. Denise apparently told her mother she should just call me herself, instead of routing it through the family group chat like she usually did. I don't know if Denise said that to protect me or to spare herself the position of go-between. Either way, it's the reason my phone rang directly instead of Sean's. 3 weeks after that, Frank's payroll tax problem stopped being something they could quietly manage, and Sherry cornered me at the Kroger. If any part of this sounds familiar, if you've ever been the one who kept everything together while somebody else got the credit, or the seat at the good end of the table, go ahead and hit subscribe, because this channel is full of stories just like it. Alright, back to that Tuesday in March, in my office, with Pat in the beige chair. She finished explaining the situation the way people explain things they've rehearsed in the car. The payroll shortfall, the bank's default letter, the house on Corbin Lane, collateral since 2019. She said for family again, softer this time, like repeating it might make it true. I asked her 3 questions. Not because I needed the answers. I already had most of them, because public liens are public, but because I wanted her to hear herself answer. How long has Marv been filing your 941s? 11 years, she said. When did you first notice the shortfall? She hesitated. Frank noticed in the fall. We thought it would sort itself out. And when did you decide to ask me? That one she didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit exactly as long as she'd let mine sit, at 100 family dinners, over 100 small comments I hadn't been allowed to correct. When the bank sent the notice, she finally said. I opened the folder I'd already pulled. I'd printed the lien filing, the public default notice, and a 1-page summary Fran had put together from records that were, again, entirely public. Nothing I'd gone digging for, nothing improper, just numbers anyone with a subscription to the county recorder's database could find in 10 minutes. Pat, I said. I offered to look at Frank's books in October of 2022. In his truck, outside the Sherwin-Williams on Route 9. 6 weeks before that Thanksgiving where you told the table I wasn't built for numbers. She went very still. I don't think she remembered the comment the way I did. People rarely remember the sentence that reorganizes someone else's life. They remember the turkey, the chandelier, the fact that everyone laughed. I don't recall saying that, she said. I do, I said. I have a decent memory for numbers. She looked down at the folder like it might explain itself without her having to ask. Is Frank's company going to be all right? She asked, and for the first time since she'd sat down, her voice didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded scared. I want to be honest. That softened something in me, even then. I don't think I'm as hard as this story might make me sound. I don't know yet, I said. It depends on how honest everyone's willing to be with me in the next 2 weeks, and whether the bank sees genuine cooperation or a scramble. Right now I've only seen public filings. I haven't seen the actual books. Marv's had them for years, she said. He's a family friend. Marv's a family friend who's 11 years behind on continuing education and doesn't file electronically, I said. That's not an opinion, Pat. That's on the county recorder's site for anyone to see. She didn't argue with that. I think, somewhere underneath the blazer and the rehearsed sentences, she already knew. I want to pause here and say something plainly because I think it matters more than the rest of the story. I wasn't trying to hurt her in that office. I want you to understand the difference between using the truth as a weapon and simply refusing to let someone rewrite it. I did the second thing. That's all I did. It felt like enough. Here's what didn't happen. I didn't write a check. I didn't take on Frank's company as a client for free, and I didn't personally guarantee anything, because I'm not in the business of rescuing people who spent 4 years deciding I wasn't worth including. Here's what did happen. I told Pat that Doyle Advisory Group takes on new clients through the same intake process as everyone else, an initial consultation at our standard rate, a full review of the books, and no promises before we've seen the numbers. I told her Frank was welcome to schedule that consultation himself, as a business owner, not through her. She looked at me like I'd changed the terms of an agreement she didn't know she'd made. I thought, she said, since we're family. You weren't treating me like family 3 Thanksgivings ago, I said. Not sharp, just true. I'm not going to start pretending otherwise because the bank sent a letter. Frank did call, 2 days later on his own, sounding smaller than I'd ever heard him. I took him on as a client. I charged him what I charge everyone. Fran and I spent 11 days going through Marv's filings and found what I'd suspected back in that truck in 2022, misclassified subcontractors, 3 years of shorted payroll deposits, a mess that was fixable, but only barely, and only because someone caught it before the bank foreclosed. We negotiated a payment plan with the IRS and a 90-day forbearance with Heritage Trust, using the same loan officer, as it turned out, who happened to know Todd. The house on Corbin Lane stayed in the family's name. Frank sold the second work truck and one of the older excavators to cover the initial IRS deposit, and Fran set up a real payroll system that flags discrepancies automatically instead of trusting a man with software from 2011. It wasn't a clean fix. It took until August, and there were 2 weeks in June where I genuinely wasn't sure which way the bank would go. But it held. I want to be honest with you. I could have let it go the other way. I chose not to, not for Pat, and not even really for Frank. I did it because Maya has grandparents on that side of the family, and I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to let my daughter inherit a war she didn't start. But I didn't invite Pat to dinner. I didn't go back to Corbin Lane for the next holiday. Some things, once you see them clearly, don't go back to looking blurry just because the crisis is over. Pat and I are polite now. She calls before she visits Maya, and she asks. She's never again told me I wasn't built for numbers, though I don't think that's growth so much as evidence. She knows now. Evidence has a way of ending certain conversations permanently. Denise and I are closer than we ever were, oddly enough. She called me after everything settled and said quietly, I should have said something back then. At the table. I told her I appreciated that, and I meant it, but I also noticed I didn't need her apology the way I might have needed it 3 years earlier. Time doesn't just heal things. Sometimes it just makes you need certain people less. I think about that Thanksgiving sometimes, not with the sting it used to have, but the way you'd look back at an old photograph of a place you don't live anymore. Pat didn't come back because she missed me. She came back because I'd become useful. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it's true, And I've learned that the truth, stated plainly, does more work than anger ever did. Maya's 5 now. She calls Fran the paper lady, because Fran sometimes brings her to the office on snow days and lets her staple things. She knows her grandma Pat mostly from scheduled visits and birthday phone calls, and I've made peace with that being the shape of it, rather than the shape I once imagined at that courthouse wedding in 2019. Some relationships settle at cordial. I used to think that was a failure. I don't anymore. An apology without accountability doesn't undo anything. What undid it, if anything did, was a folder with a lien filing in it, and a woman who never stopped keeping records, not out of spite, just out of habit, the same habit that built a folding table into a company with a gold sign on Ferris Street. Family, I've decided, isn't the people who share your Christmas card. It's the people who show up before they need something from you. If you made it this far, I'd genuinely like to know, if someone disappeared from your life while you had nothing, and only came back once you'd built something worth having, would you help them anyway? Where would you draw the line and why? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.